Chapter 3b. The Four Moods of Stalking. Don Juan said that I should sit there at that ancient lookout post and use the pull of the earth to move my assemblage point and recall other states of heightened awareness in which he had taught me stalking. In the past few days, I have mentioned many times the four moods of stalking. He went on. I have mentioned ruthlessness, cunning, patience, and sweetness, with the hope that you might remember what I had taught you about them. It would be wonderful if you could use these four moods as the ushers to bring you into a total recollection. He kept quiet for what seemed an inordinately long moment. Then he made a statement which not have surprised me, but did. He said he had taught me the four moods of stalking in northern Mexico with the help of Vicente Medrano and Silvio Manuel. He did not elaborate, but let his statement sink in. I tried to remember, but finally gave up and wanted to shout that I could not remember something that never happened. As I was struggling to voice my protest, anxious thoughts began to cross my mind. I knew Don Juan had not said what he had just to annoy me. As I always did when asked to remember heightened awareness, I became obsessively conscious that there was really no continuity to the events I had experienced under his guidance. Those events were not strung together as the events in my daily life were, in a linear sequence. It was perfectly possible he was right. In Don Juan's world, I had no business being certain of anything. I tried to voice my doubts, but he refused to listen and urged me to recollect. By then it was quite dark. It had gotten windy, but I did not feel the cold. Don Juan had given me a flat rock to place on my sternum. My awareness was keenly tuned to everything around. I felt an abrupt pull, which was neither external nor internal, but rather the sensation of a sustained tugging at an undefinable part of myself. Suddenly I began to remember with shattering clarity a meeting I had had years before. I remembered events and people so vividly that it frightened me. I felt a chill. I told all this to Don Juan, who did not seem impressed or concerned. He urged me not to give in to mental or physical fear. My recollection was so phenomenal that it was as if I were reliving the experience. Don Juan kept quiet. He did not even look at me. I felt numbed. The sensation of numbness passed slowly. I repeated the same things I always said to Don Juan when I remembered an event with no linear sequence. How can this be, Don Juan? How could I have forgotten all this? And he reaffirmed the same things he always did. This type of remembering or forgetting has nothing to do with normal memory, he assured me. It has to do with the movement of the assemblage point. He affirmed that although I possess total knowledge of what intent is, I did not command that knowledge yet. Knowing what intent is means that one can, at any time, explain that knowledge or use it. A Nagual, by the force of his position, is obliged to command his knowledge in this manner. What did you recollect? He asked me. The first time you told me about the four moods of stalking, I said. Some process, inexplicable in terms of my usual awareness of the world, had released a memory which a minute before had not existed. And I recollected an entire sequence of events that had happened many years before. Just as I was leaving Don Juan's house in Sonora, he had asked me to meet him the following week around noon, across the U.S. border in Nogales, Arizona, in the Greyhound bus depot. I arrived about an hour early. He was standing by the door. I greeted him. He did not answer, but hurriedly pulled me aside and whispered that I should take my hands out of my pockets. I was dumbfounded. He did not give me time to respond, but said that my fly was open, and it was shamefully evident that I was sexually aroused. The speed with which I rushed to cover myself was phenomenal. By the time I realized it was a crude joke, we were on the street. Don Juan was laughing, slapping me on the back repeatedly and forcefully, as if he were just celebrating the joke. Suddenly, I found myself in a state of heightened awareness. We walked into a coffee shop and sat down. My mind was so clear, I wanted to look at everything, see the essence of things. "Don't waste your energy," Don Juan commanded in a stern voice. "I brought you here to discover if you can eat when your assemblage point has moved. Don't try to do more than that." But then a man sat down at the table in front of me, and all my attention became trapped by him. "Move your eyes in circles," Don Juan commanded. "Don't look at that man." I found it impossible to stop watching the man. I felt irritated by Don Juan's demands. "What do you see?" I heard Don Juan ask. I was seeing a luminous cocoon made of transparent wings, which were folded over the cocoon itself. The wings unfolded, fluttered for an instant, peeled off, fell, and were replaced by new wings, which repeated the same process. Don Juan boldly turned my chair until I was facing the wall. "What a waste," he said in a loud sigh after I described what I had seen. "You have exhausted nearly all your energy. Restrain yourself. A warrior needs focus. Who gives a damn about wings on a luminous cocoon?" He said that heightened awareness was like a springboard. From it, one could jump into infinity. He stressed over and over that when the assemblage point was dislodged, it either became lodged again at a position very near its customary one, or continued moving on into infinity. "People have no idea of the strange power we carry within ourselves," he went on. "At this moment, for instance, you have the means to reach infinity. If you continue with your needless behavior, you may succeed in pushing your assemblage point beyond a certain threshold from which there is no return." I understood the peril he was talking about, or rather, I had the bodily sensation that I was standing on the brink of an abyss, and that if I leaned forward, I would fall into it. "Your assemblage point moved to heightened awareness," he continued, "because I have lent you my energy." We ate in silence. Very simple food. Don Juan did not allow me to drink coffee or tea. "While you are using my energy," he said, "you're not in your own time. You are in mine. I drink water. As we were walking back to my car, I felt a bit nauseous. I staggered and almost lost my balance. It was a sensation similar to that of walking while wearing glasses for the first time. Get hold of yourself, Don Juan said, smiling. Where we're going, you'll need to be extremely precise. He told me to drive across the international border into the twin city of Nogales, Mexico. While I was driving, he gave me directions. Which street to take, when to make right or left-hand turns, how fast to go. I know this area, I said, quite peeved. Tell me where you want to go, and I'll take you there, like a taxi driver. Okay, he said. Take me to 1573 Heavenward Avenue. I did not know Heavenward Avenue, or if such a street really existed. In fact, I had the suspicion he had just concocted a name to embarrass me. I kept silent. There was a mocking glint in his shiny eyes. Egomania is a real tyrant, he said. We must work ceaselessly to dethrone it. He continued to tell me how to drive. Finally, he asked me to stop in front of a one-story light beige house on a corner lot in a well-to-do neighborhood. There was something about the house that immediately caught my eye. A thick layer of osier gravel all around it. The solid street door, the window sashes, and the house trim were all painted osier, like the gravel. All the visible windows had closed Venetian blinds. To all appearances, it was a typical suburban middle-class dwelling. We got out of the car. Don Juan led the way. He did not knock or open the door with a key. But when we got to it, the door opened silently on oiled hinges, all by itself, as far as I could detect. Don Juan quickly entered. He did not invite me in. I just followed him. I was curious to see who had opened the door from the inside, but there was no one there. The interior of the house was very soothing. There were no pictures on the smooth, scrupulously clean walls. There were no lamps or bookshelves either. A golden yellow tile floor contrasted most pleasingly with the off-white color of the walls. We were in a small and narrow hall that opened into a spacious living room with a high ceiling and a brick fireplace. Half the room was completely empty, but next to the fireplace was a semicircle of expensive furniture. 2 large beige couches in the middle, flanked by 2 armchairs covered in fabric of the same color. There was a heavy, round, solid oak coffee table in the center. Judging from what I was seeing around the house, the people who lived there appeared to be well off, but frugal, and they obviously liked to sit around the fire. 2 men, perhaps in their mid-50s, sat in the armchairs. They stood when we entered. One of them was Indian, the other Latin American. Don Juan introduced me first to the Indian, who was nearer to me. "This is Silvio Manuel," Don Juan said to me. "He's the most powerful and dangerous sorcerer of my party, and the most mysterious too." Silvio Manuel's features were out of a Mayan fresco. His complexion was pale, almost yellow. I thought he looked Chinese. His eyes were slanted, but without the epicanthic fold. They were big, black, and brilliant. He was beardless. His hair was jet black, with specks of gray in it. He had high cheekbones and full lips. He was perhaps 5'7", thin, wiry, and he wore a yellow sport shirt, brown slacks, and a thin beige jacket. Judging from his clothes and general mannerisms, he seemed to be Mexican-American. I smiled and extended my hand to Silvio Manuel, but he did not take it. He nodded perfunctorily. "And this is Vicente Medrano," Don Juan said, turning to the other man. "He's the most knowledgeable and the oldest of my companions. He is the oldest not in terms of age, but because he was my benefactor's first disciple." Vicente nodded just as perfunctorily as Silvio Manuel had, and also did not say a word. He was a bit taller than Silvio Manuel, but just as lean. He had a pinkish complexion and a neatly trimmed beard and mustache. His features were almost delicate. A thin, beautifully chiseled nose, a small mouth, thin lips. Bushy dark eyebrows contrasted with his graying beard and hair. His eyes were brown and also brilliant, and laughed in spite of his frowning expression. He was conservatively dressed in a greenish seersucker suit, an open-collared sport shirt. He too seemed to be Mexican-American. I guessed him to be the owner of the house. In contrast, Don Juan looked like an Indian peon. His straw hat, his worn-out shoes, his old khaki pants and plaid shirt were those of a gardener or a handyman. The impression I had upon seeing all three of them together was that Don Juan was in disguise. The military image came to me that Don Juan was the commanding officer of a clandestine operation. An officer who, no matter how hard he tried, could not hide his years of command. I also had the feeling that they must have all been around the same age. Although Don Juan looked much older than the other two, yet seemed infinitely stronger. "I think you already know that Carlos is by far the biggest indulger I have ever met," Don Juan told them with the most serious expression. "Bigger even than our benefactor. I assure you that if there is someone who takes indulging seriously, this is the man." I laughed, but no one else did. The two men observed me with a strange glint in their eyes. "For sure you'll make a memorable trio," Don Juan continued. "The oldest and most knowledgeable, the most dangerous and powerful, and the most self-indulgent." They still did not laugh. They scrutinized me until I became self-conscious. Then Vicente broke the silence. "I don't know why you brought him inside the house," he said in a dry, cutting tone. "He's of little use to us. Put him out in the backyard." "And tie him," Silvio Manuel added. Don Juan turned to me. "Come on," he said in a soft voice, and pointed with a quick, sideways movement of his head to the back of the house. It was more than obvious that the two men did not like me. I did not know what to say. I was definitely angry and hurt. But those feelings were somehow deflected by my state of heightened awareness. We walked into the backyard. Don Juan casually picked up a leather rope and twirled it around my neck with tremendous speed. His movements were so fast and so nimble that an instant later, before I could realize what was happening, I was tied at the neck, like a dog, to one of the two cinder block columns supporting the heavy roof over the back porch. Don Juan shook his head from side to side in a gesture of resignation or disbelief and went back into the house as I began to yell at him to untie me. The rope was so tight around my neck, it prevented me from screaming as loud as I would have liked. I could not believe what was taking place. Containing my anger, I tried to undo the knot at my neck. It was so compact that the leather strands seemed glued together. I hurt my nails trying to pull them apart. I had an attack of uncontrollable wrath and growled like an impotent animal. Then I grabbed the rope, twisted it around my forearms, and bracing my feet against the cinder block column, pulled. But the leather was too tough for the strength of my muscles. I felt humiliated and scared. Fear brought me a moment of sobriety. I knew I had let Don Juan's false aura of reasonableness deceive me. I assessed my situation as objectively as I could and saw no way to escape except by cutting the leather rope. I frantically began to rub it against the sharp corner of the cinder block column. I thought that if I could rip the rope before any of the men came to the back, I had a chance to run to my car and take off, never to return. I puffed and sweated and rubbed the rope until I had nearly worn it through. Then I braced one foot against the column, wrapped the rope around my forearms again, and pulled it desperately until it snapped, throwing me back into the house. As I crashed backward through the open door, Don Juan, Vicente, and Silvio Manuel were standing in the middle of the room, applauding. "What a dramatic re-entry," Vicente said, helping me up. "You fooled me. I didn't think you were capable of such explosions." Don Juan came to me and snapped the knot open, freeing my neck from the piece of rope around it. I was shaking with fear, exertion, and anger. In a faltering voice, I asked Don Juan why he was tormenting me like this. The three of them laughed, and at that moment seemed the farthest thing from threatening. "We wanted to test you and find out what sort of a man you really are," Don Juan said. He led me to one of the couches and politely offered me a seat. Vicente and Silvio Manuel sat in the armchairs. Don Juan sat facing me on the other couch. I laughed nervously, but was no longer apprehensive about my situation, nor about Don Juan and his friends. All three regarded me with frank curiosity. Vicente could not stop smiling, although he seemed to be trying desperately to appear serious. Silvio Manuel shook his head rhythmically as he stared at me. His eyes were unfocused, but fixed on me. "We tied you down," Don Juan went on, "because we wanted to know whether you are sweet or patient or ruthless or cunning. We found out that you are none of those things. Rather, you're a king-sized indulger, just as I had said. If you hadn't indulged in being violent, you would certainly have noticed that the formidable knot in the rope around your neck was a fake. It snaps. Vicente designed that knot to fool his friends." You tore the rope violently. You're certainly not sweet, Silvio Manuel said. They were all quiet for a moment, then began to laugh. You're neither ruthless nor cunning, Don Juan went on. If you were, you would easily have snapped open both knots and run away with the valuable leather rope. You're not patient either. If you were, you would have whined and cried until you realized that there was a pair of clippers by the wall with which you could have cut the rope in 2 seconds and saved yourself all the agony and exertion. You can't be taught then to be violent or obtuse. You already are that. But you can learn to be ruthless, cunning, patient, and sweet. Don Juan explained to me that ruthlessness, cunning, patience, and sweetness were the essence of stalking. They were the basics that, with all their ramifications, had to be taught in careful, meticulous steps. He was definitely addressing me, but he talked looking at Vicente and Silvio Manuel, who listened with utmost attention and shook their heads in agreement from time to time. He stressed repeatedly that teaching stalking was one of the most difficult things sorcerers did, and he insisted that no matter what they themselves did to teach me stalking, and no matter what I believed to the contrary, it was impeccability which dictated their acts. Rest assured, we know what we're doing. Our benefactor, the Nagual Julian, saw to it, Don Juan said. And all three of them broke into such uproarious laughter that I felt quite uncomfortable. I did not know what to think. Don Juan reiterated that a very important point to consider was that to an onlooker, the behavior of sorcerers might appear malicious, when in reality their behavior was always impeccable. How can you tell the difference if you're at the receiving end? I asked. Malicious acts are performed by people for personal gain, he said. Sorcerers, though, have an ulterior purpose for their acts, which has nothing to do with personal gain. The fact that they enjoy their acts does not count as gain. Rather, it is a condition of their character. The average man acts only if there is the chance for profit. Warriors say they act not for profit, but for the spirit. I thought about it. Acting without considering gain was truly an alien concept. I had been reared to invest and to hope for some kind of reward for everything I did. Don Juan must have taken my silence and thoughtfulness as skepticism. He laughed and looked at his two companions. Take the four of us as an example, he went on. You yourself believe that you're investing in this situation and eventually you are going to profit from it. If you get angry with us, or if we disappoint you, you may resort to malicious acts to get even with us. We, on the contrary, have no thought of personal gain. Our acts are dictated by impeccability. We can't be angry or disillusioned with you. Don Juan smiled and told me that from the moment we had met at the bus depot that day, everything he had done to me, although it might not have seemed so, was dictated by impeccability. He explained that he needed to get me into an unguarded position to help me enter heightened awareness. It was to that end that he told me my fly was open. It was a way of jolting you, he said with a grin. We are crude Indians, so all our jolts are somehow primitive. The more sophisticated the warrior, the greater his finesse and elaboration of his jolts. But I have to admit, we got a kick out of our crudeness, especially when we tied you at the neck like a dog. The three of them grinned and then laughed quietly, as if there was someone else inside the house whom they did not want to disturb. In a very low voice, Don Juan said that because I was in a state of heightened awareness, I could understand more readily what he was going to tell me about the two masteries, stalking and intent. He called them the crowning glory of sorcerers, old and new. The very thing sorcerers were concerned with today, just as sorcerers had been thousands of years before. He asserted that stalking was the beginning, and that before anything could be attempted on the warrior's path, warriors must learn to stalk. Next, they must learn to intend, and only then could they move their assemblage point at will. I knew exactly what he was talking about. I knew without knowing how, what moving the assemblage point could accomplish. But I did not have the words to explain what I knew. I tried repeatedly to voice my knowledge to them. They laughed at my failures and coaxed me to try again. How would you like it if I articulate it for you? Don Juan asked. I might be able to find the very words you want to use, but can't. From his look, I decided he was seriously asking my permission. I found the situation so incongruous that I began to laugh. Don Juan, displaying great patience, asked me again, and I got another attack of laughter. Their look of surprise and concern told me my reaction was incomprehensible to them. Don Juan got up and announced that I was too tired, and it was time for me to return to the world of ordinary affairs. Wait, I pleaded. I am all right. I just find it funny that you should be asking me to give you permission. I have to ask your permission, Don Juan said, because you're the only one who can allow the words pent up inside you to be tapped. I think I made the mistake of assuming you understand more than you do. Words are tremendously powerful and important, and are the magical property of whoever has them. Sorcerers have a rule of thumb. They say that the deeper the assemblage point moves, the greater the feeling that one has knowledge and no words to explain it. Sometimes the assemblage point of average persons can move without a known cause and without their being aware of it, except that they become tongue-tied, confused, and evasive. Vicente interrupted and suggested I stay with them a while longer. Don Juan agreed and turned to face me. The very first principle of stalking is that a warrior stalks himself, he said. He stalks himself ruthlessly, cunningly, patiently, and sweetly. I wanted to laugh, but he did not give me time. Very succinctly, he defined stalking as the art of using behavior in novel ways for specific purposes. He said that normal human behavior in the world of everyday life was routine. Any behavior that broke from routine caused an unusual effect on our total being. That unusual effect was what sorcerers sought, because it was cumulative. He explained that the sorcerer-seers of ancient times, through their seeing, had first noticed that unusual behavior produced a tremor in the assemblage point. They soon discovered that if unusual behavior was practiced systematically and directed wisely, it eventually forced the assemblage point to move. The real challenge for those sorcerer-seers, Don Juan went on, was finding a system of behavior that was neither petty nor capricious, but that combined the morality and the sense of beauty which differentiates sorcerer-seers from plain witches. He stopped talking, and they all looked at me as if searching for signs of fatigue in my eyes or face. Anyone who succeeds in moving his assemblage point to a new position is a sorcerer, Don Juan continued. And from that new position, he can do all kinds of good and bad things to his fellow men. Being a sorcerer, therefore, can be like being a cobbler or a baker. The quest of sorcerer-seers is to go beyond that stand. And to do that, they need morality and beauty. He said that for sorcerers, stalking was the foundation on which everything else they did was built. Some sorcerers object to the term stalking, he went on. But the name came about because it entails surreptitious behavior. It's also called the art of stealth, but that term is equally unfortunate. We ourselves, because of our non-militant temperament, call it the art of controlled folly. You can call it anything you wish. We, however, will continue with the term stalking, since it's so easy to say stalker. And as my benefactor used to say, so awkward to say controlled folly maker. At the mention of their benefactor, they laughed like children. I understood him perfectly. I had no questions or doubts. If anything, I had the feeling that I needed to hold on to every word Don Juan was saying to anchor myself. Otherwise, my thoughts would have run ahead of him. I noticed that my eyes were fixed on the movement of his lips as my ears were fixed on the sound of his words. But once I realized this, I could no longer follow him. My concentration was broken. Don Juan continued talking, but I was not listening. I was wondering about the inconceivable possibility of living permanently in heightened awareness. I asked myself, what would the survival value be? Would one be able to assess situations better? Be quicker than the average man? Or perhaps more intelligent? Don Juan suddenly stopped talking and asked me what I was thinking about. "Ah, you're so very practical," he commented, after I had told him my reveries. I thought that in heightened awareness your temperament was going to be more artistic, more mystical. Don Juan turned to Vicente and asked him to answer my question. Vicente cleared his throat and dried his hands by rubbing them against his thighs. He gave the clear impression of suffering from stage fright. I felt sorry for him. My thoughts began to spin, and when I heard him stammering, an image burst into my mind. The image I had always had of my father's timidity, his fear of people. But before I had time to surrender myself to that image, Vicente's eyes flared with some strange inner luminosity. He made a comically serious face at me and then spoke with authority and a professional manner. To answer your question, he said, there is no survival value in heightened awareness. Otherwise, the whole human race would be there. They are safe from that, though, because it's so hard to get into it. There is always, however, the remote possibility that an average man might enter into such a state. If he does, he ordinarily succeeds in confusing himself, sometimes irreparably. The three of them exploded with laughter. Sorcerers say that heightened awareness is the portal of intent, Don Juan said, and they use it as such. Think about it. I was staring at each of them in turn. My mouth was open, and I felt that if I kept it open, I would be able to understand the riddle eventually. I closed my eyes, and the answer came to me. I felt it. I did not think it. But I could not put it into words, no matter how hard I tried. There, Don Juan said. You've gotten another sorcerer's answer all by yourself, but you still don't have enough energy to flatten it and turn it into words. The sensation I was experiencing was more than just that of being unable to voice my thoughts. It was like reliving something I had forgotten ages ago. Not to know what I felt because I had not yet learned to speak, and therefore lacked the resources to translate my feelings into thoughts. Thinking and saying exactly what you want to say requires untold amounts of energy, Don Juan said, and broke into my feelings. The force of my reverie had been so intense, it had made me forget what had started it. I stared dumbfounded at Don Juan and confessed I had no idea what they or I had said or done just a moment before. I remembered the incident of the leather rope and what Don Juan had told me immediately afterward, but I could not recall the feeling that had flooded me just moments ago. You're going the wrong way, Don Juan said. You're trying to remember thoughts the way you normally do, but this is a different situation. A second ago you had an overwhelming feeling that you knew something very specific. Such feelings cannot be recollected by using memory. You have to recall them by intending them back. He turned to Silvio Manuel, who had stretched out in the armchair, his legs under the coffee table. Silvio Manuel looked fixedly at me. His eyes were black, like two pieces of shiny obsidian. Without moving a muscle, he let out a piercing bird-like scream. "Intent!" he yelled. "Intent!" Intent! With each scream, his voice became more and more inhuman and piercing. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I felt goosebumps on my skin. My mind, however, instead of focusing on the fright I was experiencing, went directly to recollecting the feeling I had had. But before I could savor it completely, the feeling expanded and burst into something else. And then I understood not only why heightened awareness was the portal of intent, but I also understood what intent was. And above all, I understood that that knowledge could not be turned into words. That knowledge was there for everyone. It was there to be felt, to be used, but not to be explained. One could come into it by changing levels of awareness. Therefore, heightened awareness was an entrance. But even the entrance could not be explained. One could only make use of it. There was still another piece of knowledge that came to me that day without any coaching. That the natural knowledge of intent was available to anyone, but the command of it belonged to those who probed it. I was terribly tired by this time, and doubtlessly, as a result of that, my Catholic upbringing came to bear heavily on my reactions. For a moment, I believed that intent was God. I said as much to Don Juan, Vicente, and Silvio Manuel. They laughed. Vicente, still in his professional tone, professorial tone, said that it could not possibly be God, because intent was a force that could not be described, much less represented. "Don't be presumptuous," Don Juan said to me sternly. "Don't try to speculate on the basis of your first and only trial. Wait until you command your knowledge. Then decide what is what." Remembering the 4 moods of stalking exhausted me. The most dramatic result was a more than ordinary indifference. I would not have cared if I had dropped dead, nor if Don Juan had. I did not care whether we stayed at that ancient lookout post overnight or started back in the pitch dark. Don Juan was very understanding. He guided me by the hand, as if I were blind, to a massive rock, and helped me sit with my back to it. He recommended that I let natural sleep return me to a normal state of awareness. Chapter 4. The Descent of the Spirit. Seeing the Spirit. Right after a late lunch, while we were still at the table, Don Juan announced that the 2 of us were going to spend the night in the Sorcerer's Cave, and that we had to be on our way. He said that it was imperative that I sit there again, in total darkness, to allow the rock formation and the sorcerer's intent to move my assemblage point. I started to get up from my chair, but he stopped me. He said that there was something he wanted to explain to me first. He stretched out, putting his feet on the seat of a chair, then leaned back into a relaxed, comfortable position. As I see you in greater detail, Don Juan said, I notice more and more how similar you and my benefactor are. I felt so threatened that I did not let him continue. I told him that I could not imagine what those similarities were, but if there were any, a possibility I did not consider reassuring, I would appreciate it if he told me about them, to give me a chance to correct or avoid them. Don Juan laughed until tears were rolling down his cheeks. One of the similarities is that when you act very well, he said. But when you think, you always trip yourself up. My benefactor was like that. He didn't think too well. I was just about to defend myself, to say there was nothing wrong with my thinking, when I caught a glint of mischievousness in his eyes. I stopped cold. Don Juan noticed my shift and laughed with a note of surprise. He must have been anticipating the opposite. What I mean, for instance, is that you only have problems understanding the spirit when you think about it, he went on, with a chiding smile. But when you act, the spirit easily reveals itself to you. My benefactor was that way. Before we leave for the cave, I'm going to tell you a story about my benefactor and the fourth abstract core. Sorcerers believe that until the very moment of the spirit's descent, any of us could walk away from the spirit, but not afterwards. Don Juan deliberately stopped to urge me, with a movement of his eyebrows, to consider what he was telling me. The fourth abstract core is the full brunt of the spirit's descent, he went on. The fourth abstract core is an act of revelation. The spirit reveals itself to us. Sorcerers describe it as the spirit lying in ambush and then descending on us, its prey. Sorcerers say that the spirit's descent is always shrouded. It happens, and yet it seems not to have happened at all. I became very nervous. Don Juan's tone of voice was giving me the feeling that he was preparing to spring something on me at any moment. He asked me if I remembered the moment the spirit descended on me, sealing my permanent allegiance to the abstract. I had no idea what he was talking about. There is a threshold that once crossed permits no retreat, he said. Ordinarily, from the moment the spirit knocks, it is years before an apprentice reaches that threshold. Sometimes, though, the threshold is reached almost immediately. My benefactor's case is an example. Don Juan said every sorcerer should have a clear memory of crossing that threshold so he could remind himself of the new state of his perceptual potential. He explained that one did not have to be an apprentice of sorcery to reach this threshold, and that the only difference between an average man and a sorcerer in such cases is what each emphasizes. A sorcerer emphasizes crossing this threshold and uses the memory of it as a point of reference. An average man does not cross the threshold and does his best to forget all about it. I told him that I did not agree with his point, because I could not accept that there was only one threshold to cross. Don Juan looked heavenward in dismay and shook his head in a joking gesture of despair. I proceeded with my argument, not to disagree with him, but to clarify things in my mind. Yet I quickly lost my impetus. Suddenly I had the feeling I was sliding through a tunnel. Sorcerers say that the fourth abstract core happens when the spirit cuts our chains of self-reflection. He said, cutting our chains is marvelous, but also very undesirable, for nobody wants to be free. The sensation of sliding through a tunnel persisted for a moment longer, and then everything became clear to me, and I began to laugh. Strange insights pent up inside me were exploding into laughter. Don Juan seemed to be reading my mind as if it were a book. What a strange feeling to realize that everything we think, everything we say, depends on the position of the assemblage point, he remarked. And that was exactly what I had been thinking and laughing about. I know that at this moment your assemblage point has shifted, he went on, and you have understood the secret of our chains. They imprison us, but by keeping us pinned down on our comfortable spot of self-reflection, they defend us from the onslaughts of the unknown. I was having one of those extraordinary moments in which everything about the sorcerer's world was crystal clear. I understood everything. Once our chains are cut, Don Juan continued, we are no longer bound by the concerns of the daily world. We are still in the daily world, but we don't belong there anymore. In order to belong, we must share the concerns of people, and without chains, we can't. Don Juan said that the Nagual Elias had explained to him that what distinguishes normal people is that we share a metaphorical dagger, the concerns of our self-reflection. With this dagger, we cut ourselves and bleed, and the job of our chains of self-reflection is to give us the feeling that we are bleeding together, that we are sharing something wonderful, our humanity. But if we were to examine it, we would discover that we are bleeding alone, that we are not sharing anything, that all we are doing is toying with our manageable, unreal, man-made reflection. Sorcerers are no longer in the world of daily affairs, Don Juan went on, because they are no longer prey to their self-reflection. Don Juan then began his story about his benefactor and the descent of the spirit. He said that the story started right after the spirit had knocked on the young actor's door. I interrupted Don Juan and asked him why he consistently used the terms young man or young actor to refer to the Nagual Julian. At the time of this story, he wasn't the Nagual, Don Juan replied. He was a young actor. In my story, I can't just call him Julian, because to me, he was always the Nagual Julian. As a sign of deference for his lifetime of impeccability, we always prefix Nagual to a Nagual's name. Don Juan proceeded with his story. He said that the Nagual Elias had stopped the young actor's death by making him shift into heightened awareness. And following hours of struggle, the young actor regained consciousness. The Nagual Elias did not mention his name, but he introduced himself as a professional healer who had stumbled onto the scene of a tragedy where two persons had nearly died. He pointed to the young woman, Talia, stretched out on the ground. The young man was astonished to see her lying unconscious next to him. He remembered seeing her as she ran away. It startled him to hear the old healer explain that doubtlessly God had punished Talia for her sins by striking her with lightning and making her lose her mind. But how could there be lightning if it's not even raining? The young actor asked in a barely audible voice. He was visibly affected when the old Indian replied that God's ways couldn't be questioned. Again I interrupted Don Juan. I was curious to know if the young woman really had lost her mind. He reminded me that the Nagual Elias delivered a shattering blow to her assemblage point. He said that she had not lost her mind, but that as a result of the blow, she slipped in and out of heightened awareness, creating a serious threat to her health. After a gigantic struggle, however, the Nagual Elias helped her to stabilize her assemblage point, and she entered permanently into heightened awareness. Don Juan commented that women are capable of such a master stroke. They can permanently maintain a new position of their assemblage point. And Talia was peerless. As soon as her chains were broken, she immediately understood everything and complied with the Nagual's designs. Don Juan, recounting his story, said that the Nagual Elias, who was not only a superb dreamer, but also a superb stalker, had seen that the young actor was spoiled and conceited, but only seemed to be hard and calloused. The Nagual knew that if he brought forth the idea of God, sin, and retribution, the actor's religious beliefs would make his cynical attitude collapse. Upon hearing about God's punishment, the actor's facade began to crumble. He started to express remorse. But the Nagual cut him short and forcefully stressed that when death was so near, feelings of guilt no longer mattered. The young actor listened attentively, but although he felt very ill, he did not believe that he was in danger of dying. He thought his weakness and fainting had been brought on by his loss of blood. As if he had read the young actor's mind, the Nagual explained to him that those optimistic thoughts were out of place, that his hemorrhaging would have been fatal had it not been for the plug he, as a healer, had created. When I struck your back, I put a plug to stop the draining of your life force, the Nagual said to the skeptical young actor. Without that restraint, the unavoidable process of your death would continue. If you don't believe me, I'll prove it to you by removing the plug with another blow. As he spoke, the Nagual Elias tapped the young actor on his right side by his rib cage. In a moment, the young man was retching and choking. Blood poured out of his mouth as he coughed uncontrollably. Another tap on his back stopped the agonizing pain and retching, but it did not stop his fear, and he passed out. "I can control your death for the time being," the Nagual said when the young actor regained consciousness. "How long I can control it depends on you, on how faithfully you acquiesce to everything I tell you to do." The Nagual said that the first requirements of the young man were total immobility and silence. If he did not want his plug to come out, the Nagual added, he had to behave as if he had lost his powers of motion and speech. A single twitch or a single utterance would be enough to restart his dying. The young actor was not accustomed to complying with suggestions or demands. He felt a surge of anger. As he started to voice his protest, the burning pain and convulsions started up again. "Stay with it, and I will cure you," the Nagual said. "Act like the weak, rotten imbecile you are, and you will die." The actor, a proud young man, was numbed by the insult. Nobody had ever called him a weak, rotten imbecile. He wanted to express his fury, but his pain was so severe that he could not react to the indignity. "If you want me to ease your pain, you must obey me blindly," the Nagual said with frightening coldness. "Signal me with a nod, but know now that the moment you change your mind and act like the shameful moron you are, I'll immediately pull the plug and leave you to die." With his last bit of strength, the actor nodded his assent. The Nagual tapped him on his back, and his pain vanished. But along with the searing pain, something else vanished, the fog in his mind. And then the young actor knew everything without understanding anything. The Nagual introduced himself again. He told him that his name was Elias, and that he was the Nagual. And the actor knew what it all meant. The Nagual Elias then shifted his attention to the semi-conscious Talia. He put his mouth to her left ear and whispered commands to her in order to make her assemblage point stop its erratic shifting. He soothed her fear by telling her, in whispers, stories of sorcerers who had gone through the same thing she was experiencing. When she was fairly calm, he introduced himself as the Nagual Elias, a sorcerer. And then he attempted with her the most difficult thing in sorcery, moving the assemblage point beyond the sphere of the world we know. Don Juan remarked that seasoned sorcerers are capable of moving beyond the world we know, but that inexperienced persons are not. The Nagual Elias always maintained that ordinarily he would not have dreamed of attempting such a feat. But on that day, something other than his knowledge or his volition was making him act. Yet the maneuver worked. Talia moved beyond the world we know and came safely back. Then the Nagual Elias had another insight. He sat between the two people stretched out on the ground. The actor was naked, covered only by the Nagual Elias's riding coat, and reviewed their situation. He told them they had both, by the force of circumstances, fallen into a trap set by the spirit itself. He, the Nagual, was the active part of that trap, because by encountering them under the conditions he had been forced to become their temporary protector and to engage his knowledge of sorcery in order to help them. As their temporary protector, it was his duty to warn them that they were about to reach a unique threshold, and that it was up to them, both individually and together, to attain that threshold by entering a mood of abandon, but not recklessness, a mood of caring, but not indulgence. He did not want to say more for fear of confusing them or influencing their decision. He felt that if they were to cross that threshold, it had to be with minimal help from him. The Nagual then left them alone in that isolated spot and went to the city to arrange for medicinal herbs, mats, and blankets to be brought to them. His idea was that in solitude they would attain and cross that threshold. For a long time, the two young people lay next to each other, immersed in their own thoughts. The fact that their assemblage points had shifted meant that they could think in greater depth than ordinarily. But it also meant that they worried, pondered, and were afraid in equally greater depth. Since Talia could talk and was a bit stronger, she broke their silence. She asked the young actor if he was afraid. He nodded affirmatively. She felt a great compassion for him and took off a shawl she was wearing to put over his shoulders, and she held his hand. The young man did not dare voice what he felt. His fear that his pain would recur if he spoke was too great and too vivid. He wanted to apologize to her, to tell her that his only regret was having hurt her, and that it did not matter that he was going to die, for he knew with certainty that he was not going to survive that day. Talia's thoughts were on the same subject. She said that she too had only one regret, that she had fought him hard enough to bring on his death. She was very peaceful now, a feeling which, agitated as she always was and driven by her great strength, was unfamiliar to her. She told him that her death was very near too, and that she was glad it would all end that day. The young actor, hearing his own thoughts being spoken by Talia, felt a chill. A surge of energy came to him then and made him sit up. He was not in pain, nor was he coughing. He took in great gulps of air, something he had no memory of having done before. He took the girl's hand, and they began to talk without vocalizing. Don Juan said it was at that instant that the spirit came to them, and they saw. They were deeply Catholic, and what they saw was a vision of heaven, where everything was alive, bathed in light. They saw a world of miraculous sights. When the Nagual returned, they were exhausted, although not injured. Talia was unconscious, but the young man had managed to remain aware by a supreme effort of self-control. He insisted on whispering something in the Nagual's ear. "We saw heaven," he whispered, tears rolling down his cheeks. "You saw more than that," the Nagual Elias retorted. you saw the spirit. Don Juan said that since the spirit's descent is always shrouded naturally, Talia and the young actor could not hold on to their vision. They soon forgot it, as anyone would. The uniqueness of their experience was that, without any training and without being aware of it, they had dreamed together and had seen the spirit. For them to have achieved this with such ease was quite out of the ordinary. Those two were really the most remarkable beings I have ever met, Don Juan added. I naturally wanted to know more about them, but Don Juan would not indulge me. He said that this was all there was about his benefactor and the fourth abstract core. He seemed to remember something he was not telling me and laughed uproariously. Then he patted me on the back and told me it was time to set out for the cave. When we got to the rock ledge, it was almost dark. Don Juan sat down hurriedly in the same position as the first time. He was to my right, touching me with his shoulder. He immediately seemed to enter into a deep state of relaxation, which pulled me into total immobility and silence. I could not even hear his breathing. I closed my eyes, and he nudged me to warn me to keep them open. By the time it became completely dark, an immense fatigue had begun to make my eyes sore and itchy. Finally, I gave up my resistance and was pulled into the deepest, blackest sleep I have ever had. Yet I was not totally asleep. I could feel the thick blackness around me. I had an entirely physical sensation of wading through blackness. Then it suddenly became reddish, then orange, then glaring white, like a terribly strong neon light. Gradually I focused my vision until I saw I was still sitting in the same position with Don Juan, but no longer in the cave. We were on a mountaintop, looking down over exquisite flatlands, with mountains in the distance. This beautiful prairie was bathed in a glow that, like rays of light, emanated from the land itself. Wherever I looked, I saw familiar features: rocks, hills, rivers, forests, canyons, enhanced and transformed by their inner vibration, their inner glow. This glow that was so pleasing to my eyes also tingled out of my very being. Your assemblage point has moved, Don Juan seemed to say to me. The words had no sound. Nevertheless, I knew what he had just said to me. My rational reaction was to try to explain to myself that I had no doubt heard him as I would have if he had been talking in a vacuum, probably because my ears had been temporarily affected by what was transpiring. Your ears are fine. We are in a different realm of awareness, Don Juan again seemed to say to me. I could not speak. I felt the lethargy of deep sleep preventing me from saying a word. Yet I was as alert as I could be. What's happening? I thought. The cave made your assemblage point move, Don Juan thought, and I heard his thoughts as if they were my own words, voiced to myself. I sensed a command that was not expressed in thoughts. Something ordered me to look again at the prairie. As I stared at the wondrous sight, filaments of light began to radiate from everything on that prairie. At first, it was like the explosion of an infinite number of short fibers. Then the fibers became long, thread-like strands of luminosity, bundled together into beams of vibrating light that reached infinity. There was really no way for me to make sense of what I was seeing, or to describe it, except as filaments of vibrating light. The filaments were not intermingled or entwined, although they sprang and continued to spring in every direction. Each one was separate, and yet all of them were inextricably bundled together. You are seeing the eagle's emanations and the force that keeps them apart and bundles them together, Don Juan thought. The instant I caught his thought, the filaments of light seemed to consume all my energy. Fatigue overwhelmed me. It erased my vision and plunged me into darkness. When I became aware of myself again, there was something so familiar around me, although I could not tell what it was, that I believed myself to be back in a normal state of awareness. Don Juan was asleep beside me, his shoulder against mine. Then I realized that the darkness around us was so intense that I could not even see my hands. I speculated that fog must have covered the ledge and filled the cave. Or perhaps it was the wispy low clouds that descended every rainy night from the higher mountains like a silent avalanche. Yet in spite of the total blackness, somehow I saw that Don Juan had opened his eyes immediately after I became aware, although he did not look at me. Instantly I realized that seeing him was not a consequence of light on my retina. It was rather a bodily sense. I became so engrossed in observing Don Juan without my eyes that I was not paying attention to what he was telling me. Finally, he stopped talking and turned his face to me, as if to look me in the eye. He coughed a couple of times to clear his throat and started to talk in a very low voice. He said that his benefactor used to come to the cave quite often, both with him and with his other disciples, but more often by himself. In that cave, his benefactor saw the same prairie we had just seen, a vision that gave him the idea of describing the spirit as the flow of things. Don Juan repeated that his benefactor was not a good thinker. Had he been, he would have realized in an instant that what he had seen and described as the flow of things was intent, the force that permeates everything. Don Juan added that if his benefactor ever became aware of the nature of his seeing, he didn't reveal it, and he himself had the idea that his benefactor never knew it. Instead, his benefactor believed that he had seen the flow of things, which was the absolute truth, but not the way he meant it. Don Juan was so emphatic about this that I wanted to ask him what the difference was, but I could not speak. My throat seemed frozen. We sat there in complete silence and immobility for hours. Yet I did not experience any discomfort. My muscles did not get tired. My legs did not fall asleep. My back did not ache. When he began to talk again, I did not even notice the transition, and I readily abandoned myself to listening to his voice. It was a melodic, rhythmical sound that emerged from the total blackness that surrounded me. He said that at that very moment, I was not in my normal state of awareness, nor was I in heightened awareness. I was suspended in a lull, in the blackness of non-perception. My assemblage point had moved away from perceiving the daily world, but it had not moved enough to reach and light a totally new bundle of energy fields. Properly speaking, I was caught between two perceptual possibilities. This in-between state, this lull of perception, had been reached through the influence of the cave, which was itself guided by the intent of the sorcerers who carved it. Don Juan asked me to pay close attention to what he was going to say next. He said that thousands of years ago, by means of seeing, sorcerers became aware that the earth was sentient and that its awareness could affect the awareness of humans. They tried to find a way to use the earth's influence on human awareness, and they discovered that certain caves were most effective. Don Juan said that the search for caves became nearly full-time work for those sorcerers, and that through their endeavors they were able to discover a variety of uses for a variety of cave configurations. He added that out of all that work, the only result pertinent to us was this particular cave and its capacity to move the assemblage point until it reached a lull of perception. As Don Juan spoke, I had the unsettling sensation that something was clearing in my mind. Something was funneling my awareness into a long, narrow channel. All the superfluous half-thoughts and feelings of my normal awareness were being squeezed out. Don Juan was thoroughly aware of what was happening to me. I heard his soft chuckle of satisfaction. He said that now we could talk more easily, and our conversation would have more depth. I remembered at that moment scores of things he had explained to me before. For instance, I knew that I was dreaming. I was actually sound asleep, yet I was totally aware of myself through my second attention, the counterpart of my normal attentiveness. I was certain I was asleep because of a bodily sensation, plus a rational deduction based on statements that Don Juan had made in the past. I had just seen the eagle's emanations, and Don Juan had said that it was impossible for sorcerers to have a sustained view of the eagle's emanations in any way except in dreaming. Therefore, I had to be dreaming. Don Juan had explained that the universe is made up of energy fields which defy description or scrutiny. He had said that they resembled filaments of ordinary light, except that light is lifeless compared to the eagle's emanations, which exude awareness. I had never, until this night, been able to see them in a sustained manner. And indeed, they were made out of a light that was alive. Don Juan had maintained in the past that my knowledge and control of intent were not adequate to withstand the impact of that sight. He had explained that normal perception occurs when intent, which is pure energy, lights up a portion of the luminous filaments inside our cocoon, and at the same time brightens a long extension of the same luminous filaments extending into infinity outside our cocoon. Extraordinary perception, seen, occurs when by the force of intent a different cluster of energy fields energizes and lights up. He had said that when a crucial number of energy fields are lit up inside the luminous cocoon, a sorcerer is able to see the energy fields themselves. On another occasion, Don Juan had recounted the rational thinking of the early sorcerers. He had told me that through their seeing, they realized that awareness took place when the energy fields inside our luminous cocoon were aligned with the same energy fields outside. And they believed they had discovered alignment as the source of awareness. Upon close examination, however, it became evident that what they had called alignment of the eagle's emanations did not entirely explain what they were seeing. They had noticed that only a very small portion of the total number of luminous filaments inside the cocoon was energized, while the rest remained unaltered. Seeing these few filaments energized had created a false discovery. The filaments did not need to be aligned to be lit up, because the ones inside our cocoon were the same as those outside. Whatever energized them was definitely an independent force. They felt they could not continue to call it awareness, as they had, because awareness was the glow of the energy fields being lit up. So the force that lit up the fields was named will. Don Juan had said that when their seeing became still more sophisticated and effective, they realized that will was the force that kept the eagle's emanations separated and was not only responsible for our awareness, but also for everything in the universe. They saw that this force had total consciousness and that it sprang from the very fields of energy that made the universe. They decided then that intent was a more appropriate name for it than will. In the long run, however, the name proved disadvantageous because it does not describe its overwhelming importance, nor the living connection it has with everything in the universe. Don Juan had asserted that our great collective flaw is that we live our lives completely disregarding that connection. The busyness of our lives, our relentless interests, concerns, hopes, frustrations, and fears take precedence, and on a day-to-day basis, we are unaware of being linked to everything else. Don Juan had stated his belief that the Christian idea of being cast out from the Garden of Eden sounded to him like an allegory for losing our silent knowledge, our knowledge of intent. Sorcery then was a going back to the beginning, a return to paradise. We stayed seated in the cave in total silence, perhaps for hours, or perhaps it was only a few instants. Suddenly Don Juan began to talk, and the unexpected sound of his voice jarred me. I did not catch what he said. I cleared my throat to ask him to repeat what he had said, and that act brought me completely out of my reflectiveness. I quickly realized that the darkness around me was no longer impenetrable. I could speak now. I felt I was back in my normal state of awareness. In a calm voice, Don Juan told me that for the very first time in my life, I had seen the Spirit, the force that sustains the universe. He emphasized that intent is not something one might use or command or move in any way. Nevertheless, one could use it, command it, or move it as one desires. This contradiction, he said, is the essence of sorcery. To fail to understand it had brought generations of sorcerers unimaginable pain and sorrow. Modern-day Nahuals, in an effort to avoid paying this exorbitant price in pain, had developed a code of behavior called the Warrior's Way, or the impeccable action, which prepared sorcerers by enhancing their sobriety and thoughtfulness. Don Juan explained that at one time in the remote past, sorcerers were deeply interested in the general connecting link that intent has with everything. And by focusing their second attention on that link, they acquired not only direct knowledge, but also the ability to manipulate that knowledge and perform astounding deeds. They did not acquire, however, the soundness of mind needed to manage all that power. So in a judicious mood, sorcerers decided to focus their second attention solely on the connecting link of creatures who have awareness. This included the entire range of existing organic beings, as well as the entire range of what sorcerers call inorganic beings, or allies, which they described as entities with awareness, but no life as we understand life. This solution was not successful either, because it too failed to bring them wisdom. In their next reduction, sorcerers focused their attention exclusively on the link that connects human beings with intent. The end result was very much as before. Then sorcerers sought a final reduction. Each sorcerer would be concerned solely with his individual connection. But this proved to be equally ineffective. Don Juan said that although there were remarkable differences among those 4 areas of interest, one was as corrupting as another. So in the end, sorcerers concerned themselves exclusively with the capacity that their individual connecting link with intent had to set them free, to light the fire from within. He asserted that all modern-day sorcerers have to struggle fiercely to gain soundness of mind. A Nagual has to struggle especially hard because he has more strength, a greater command over the energy fields that determine perception, and more training in and familiarity with the intricacies of silent knowledge, which is nothing but a direct contact with intent. Examined in this way, sorcery becomes an attempt to reestablish our knowledge of intent and regain use of it without succumbing to it. And the abstract cores of the sorcery stories are shades of realization, degrees of our being aware of intent. I understood Don Juan's explanation with perfect clarity. But the more I understood, and the clearer his statements became, the greater my sense of loss and despondency. At one moment, I sincerely considered ending my life right there. I felt I was damned. Nearly in tears, I told Don Juan that there was no point in his continuing his explanation, for I knew that I was about to lose my clarity of mind, and that when I reverted back to my normal state of awareness, I would have no memory of having seen or heard anything. My mundane consciousness would impose its lifelong habit of repetition and the reasonable predictability of its logic. That was why I felt damned. I told him that I resented my fate. Don Juan responded that even in heightened awareness, I thrived on repetition, and that periodically I would insist on boring him by describing my attacks of feeling worthless. He said that if I had to go under it, should be fighting, not apologizing or feeling sorry for myself, and that it did not matter what our specific fate was, as long as we faced it with ultimate abandon. His words made me feel blissfully happy. I repeated over and over, tears streaming down my cheeks, that I agreed with him. There was such profound happiness in me, I suspected my nerves were getting out of hand. I called upon all my forces to stop this, and I felt the sobering effect of my mental breaks. But as this happened, my clarity of mind began to diffuse. I silently fought, trying to be both less sober and less nervous. Don Juan did not make a sound and left me alone. By the time I had reestablished my balance, it was almost dawn. Don Juan stood, stretched his arms above his head, and tensed his muscles, making his joints crack. He helped me up and commented that I had spent a most enlightening night. I had experienced what the Spirit was and had been able to summon hidden strength to accomplish something, which on the surface amounted to calming my nervousness. But at a deeper level, it had actually been a very successful volitional movement of my assemblage point. He signaled me then that it was time to start on our way back.